The rain-slicked streets of Brooklyn gleamed under the sodium lamps like 1,000 shattered promises, and David Kane stood at the edge of the rooftop, his fingers trembling around the neck of his guitar as if it were the only thing keeping him from the void below. "I can't do this without you," he whispered to the empty night, his voice cracking like thunder in the storm that had just passed. But the words weren't for the wind. They were for Richard, the ghost who had already walked away. In that moment, as the first stars pierced the clouds, David realized that the melody he'd been chasing for years wasn't in the notes he'd written, but in the silence Richard had left behind, a silence that screamed louder than any crowd ever could. David had always believed music was his salvation, a gritty lifeline in the concrete jungle of New York City where dreams curdled faster than milk left on a fire escape. At 28, he was a fixture in the dive bars of the East Village, strumming his beat-up Taylor through sets of half-forgotten covers and originals that bled with the ache of unrequited everything. His voice, rough-hewn like the gravel under his boots, carried tales of lost boys and midnight confessions, the kind that made tipsy audiences lean in, eyes glassy with their own regrets. But tonight, at the Rusty Nail, a hole-in-the-wall joint with peeling posters of Springsteen and Dylan taped to the walls, David felt the weight of it all pressing down harder than usual. His band, the Fractured Chords, had just imploded in a haze of ego and cheap whiskey. His drummer, Mikey, had split for a real gig in Jersey, and bassist Lena had ghosted him after one too many late-night arguments about set lists. Now it was just him, alone on stage under a single flickering spotlight, the crowd a blur of flannel shirts and ironic tattoos. He adjusted the mic stand, its rust flaking onto his scuffed Converse, and let his fingers dance over the strings. The opening chords of his new song, "Echoes in the Alley," rippled out, raw and unpolished, painting pictures of shadowed doorways where lovers parted with nothing but a shared cigarette. The room hushed, the clink of glasses fading as David's lyrics poured forth. "We carved our names in the wet pavement, but the rain washed 'em clean / left me standin' in the downpour, chasin' what might have been." His voice trembled on the high notes, not from nerves, but from the truth in them, the way he'd always loved too fiercely, too quietly, in a world that pretended men like him didn't exist outside of whispers and warnings. Halfway through the bridge, the door to the bar creaked open, letting in a gust of October chill that carried the scent of fallen leaves and distant traffic. David didn't look up at first. He was lost in the swell of the music, eyes squeezed shut against the sting of sweat. But when he hit the final chorus, a low whistle cut through the applause like a knife, sharp, appreciative, and utterly out of place in this sea of polite claps. He blinked, scanning the faces, and there, leaning against the scarred oak bar with a half-smile that could unravel a saint, was Richard Hale. Richard was the kind of guy who walked into a room and owned it without trying, tall, broad-shouldered, with chestnut hair cropped close on the sides and longer on top, falling just so over hazel eyes that held secrets like hidden track listings on a vinyl sleeve. 30. He was a producer on the rise, the wunderkind behind indie hits that had climbed Spotify playlists from obscurity to cult status. Born in the sprawl of Los Angeles but transplanted to New York for its grit, Richard had a voice like smoked bourbon, smooth, with an undercurrent of burn, and a laugh that echoed like reverb in an empty studio. He'd come to the Rusty Nail on a whim, dragged by a mutual friend scouting talent for a podcast. But one strum from David, and he was hooked. Not just on the music, but on the man wielding it. The way David's lean frame leaned into the guitar like a lover, his sharp jaw set in determination, faded jeans hugging hips that swayed just enough to betray the fire beneath his quiet demeanor. After the set, Richard lingered, nursing a Jameson on the rocks while the crowd thinned to stragglers nursing hangovers in waiting. David packed up his gear with mechanical precision, avoiding eye contact, the post-show vulnerability settling in like fog off the East River. He was zipping his case when a shadow fell over him. Richard, extending a hand scarred from years of calluses, the kind that came from fretboards and not desk jobs. "That was something else," Richard said, his California drawl softening the edges of the words. "You play like you're fighting for your life." "What's the story behind Echoes?" David straightened, wiping his palms on his jeans, heart thudding in a rhythm he couldn't name. Close. Richard smelled like cedar cologne and fresh ink, probably from the notebook peeking from his jacket pocket. "Just life," David muttered, shaking the hand, feeling the warmth linger like a cord held too long. "The parts that don't rhyme easy," they talked then, words tumbling out over the bar's last call, about chord progressions that mimicked heartbreak, the tyranny of algorithms killing real music, and the ache of being queer in scenes that cheered your talent but side-eyed your truth. Richard confessed he'd grown up hiding mixtapes under his bed in Echo Park, blasting Elliott Smith until his parents banged on the door. David shared stories of his Wisconsin roots, small-town Sundays where church hymns drowned out the rumors about the artistic neighbor boy. By closing time, the bartender was flipping chairs onto tables, and Richard's eyes had that spark, the one that said this wasn't just small talk. "Walk with me," Richard asked, nodding toward the door. David hesitated, the city's pulse thrumming outside like a bass line waiting to drop. But something in Richard's gaze pulled him under, a current stronger than caution. They stepped into the night, shoulders brushing as they wandered the labyrinth of brownstones and bodegas, the conversation weaving deeper. Richard pulled out his phone, queuing up a track he'd produced, a haunting electronica piece laced with acoustic whispers, and held it between them like a shared secret. David listened, head tilted, and when it ended, he grinned for the first time that night. "That's got soul. Like it knows what it's like to be invisible." They ended up at a 24-hour diner on Avenue B, fluorescent lights buzzing over Formica counters sticky with syrup residue. Over black coffee and half-eaten slices of cherry pie, Richard leaned in, voice dropping low. "I've got a studio in Bushwick. Empty tomorrow night. Come jam. No pressure. Just see what happens when two strangers make noise." David's pulse raced, the invitation hanging heavy with subtext. He nodded, throat tight, because in that greasy booth, under the glare of a flickering open sign, he felt seen, not as the broke busker scraping by on gig wages and ramen, but as a force, a voice worth amplifying. The next evening, David arrived at the studio with his guitar slung over his shoulder like armor, the subway ride a blur of second-guessing. The space was a converted warehouse loft, exposed brick walls lined with baffles and amps, the air humming with the ghosts of sessions past. Richard greeted him at the door in a heather-gray Henley that clung just right, sleeves rolled to reveal forearms etched with a delicate tattoo of a treble clef twisted into an infinity loop. "Right on time," Richard said, clapping David's shoulder, the touch electric. They settled in. Mics unplugged. No takes, just play. David started with a riff from Echoes, fingers flying tentative at first, but Richard jumped in seamless, layering a counter-melody on his electric that turned melancholy into something alive, pulsing. Hours slipped away unnoticed, the clock ticking past midnight as they traded solos and harmonies, laughter punctuating missed notes. Richard's voice blended with David's in ways that felt predestined, rich lows anchoring David's soaring falsetto, their breaths sinking like a duet long rehearsed. In a lull, sweat damp and exhilarated, Richard set down his guitar and crossed the room, stopping inches from David. The air thickened, charged with the scent of rosin and possibility. "You're incredible," Richard murmured, thumb brushing David's cheek, wiping away a stray bead of perspiration. David's breath hitched, eyes locking on Richard's lips, full, parted slightly, inviting. And then they were kissing, slow at first, exploratory, like testing a new chord progression. David's hands fisted in Richard's shirt, pulling him closer, the world narrowing to the heat of mouths and the faint taste of mint gum. They broke apart gasping, foreheads pressed together, and Richard chuckled softly. That was better than any track I've cut." David smiled, shy but bold, tracing the line of Richard's jaw. 2 hours of harmony," he whispered, the words slipping out unbidden. It became their phrase, etched in that night, the span of time it took for music and touch to rewrite their solos into a shared symphony. But harmony, David would learn, was fragile as a B-string under tension. In the weeks that followed, what bloomed between them was a whirlwind of stolen moments and late-night confessions. Richard's apartment in Williamsburg became their sanctuary, a sun-drenched walk-up with vinyl stacks towering like modern art and a fire escape perfect for dawn smokes. They'd cook haphazard meals, Richard's avocado toast experiments clashing hilariously with David's Midwestern meatloaf attempts, then collapse onto the worn leather couch, David's head in Richard's lap as fingers combed through his curls. Sex came naturally, fiercely, bodies mapping each other with the reverence of artists sketching masterpieces. Richard's hands strong on David's hips, guiding him with a producer's precision. David's lips tracing the constellation of freckles across Richard's chest, each kiss a note in an unending refrain. Yet beneath the romance simmered shadows. Richard's career was accelerating. A deal with a mid-tier label for his next project, whispers of Grammy nods for tracks he'd helmed. David, meanwhile, hustled bar gigs and open mics, his originals gathering dust in notebooks while bills piled like unsent demos. "You're gold, babe," Richard would say, pulling David into bed after a rejection email from yet another A&R drone. "They'll see it. We'll make it together." And in those arms, David believed, envisioning an album co-credited, tours where their voices intertwined under spotlights from coast to coast. The first crack appeared subtly, like a hairline fracture in fine china. One evening, as they pored over lyrics in the studio, Richard's phone buzzed incessantly. He silenced it, but not before David glimpsed the sender. Jack's new collab? Jax Harlan, the golden boy of indie rock. All cheekbones and calculated vulnerability, the kind of artist labels threw money at without a second thought. Richard waved it off, just networking, but his eyes lingered on the screen a beat too long. That night, as they made love on the studio floor amid scattered cables, David's mind wandered to the what-ifs. What if Richard's ambition outpaced their harmony? What if he was just a stepping stone, a raw voice to polish for someone else's shine? The fracture widened at an industry party in a Soho loft. Fairy lights strung like veins across vaulted ceilings, air thick with craft cocktails and schmoozing. David felt out of place in his thrift store button-down, clutching a warm beer while Richard worked the room, all easy charm and backslaps. Jax was there, of course, lounging on a velvet chaise, his laugh a siren call drawing investors like moths. David watched from the fringes as Richard joined him, their heads bent close over a shared iPad, fingers gesturing animatedly. Laughter bubbled up, intimate, excluding. When Richard caught David's eye and waved him over, the introductions felt scripted. "This is David, killer talent. Just wait till you hear him." Jax's smile was all teeth. "Heard the buzz? That Echoes track? Fire. You should send me something." But as the night wore on, David saw the shift. Richard's arm slung casual around Jax's shoulders, whispers laced with inside jokes from L.A. Days. Jealousy coiled in David's gut, hot and irrational, but he swallowed it down with another beer, telling himself it was the booze talking. Back home, the argument erupted like a distorted amp. "What's with you and Jax?" David demanded, pacing the kitchen, the Formica Island a battlefield. Richard leaned against the fridge, arms crossed, defensiveness etching lines around his mouth. "It's business, Dave. He's got connections, could open doors for us." "Us? Or you?" The words hung, venomous. Richard's face hardened. "Don't make this ugly. I'm building something here, for both of us." But David saw the lie in the averted gaze, the way Richard's fingers drummed an anxious rhythm on his thigh. The betrayal crystallized 2 weeks later, in the cold fluorescence of Richard's studio. David arrived unannounced, takeout tie in hand, eager to surprise with a new melody he'd scribbled on a napkin during his shift at the coffee shop. The door was ajar, voices spilling out, Richard's, warm and coaxing, overlaid with Jax's lighter timbre. David froze in the threshold, heart plummeting as he pieced it together. Richard at the board, tweaking levels, Jax in the booth, crooning lyrics that were unmistakably David's. We carved our names in the wet pavement. The song twisted, polished with synth layers and Jax's honeyed falsetto. No trace of the raw ache David had poured into it. "You stole it," David choked out, bag of pad thai slipping from his fingers to splatter on the floor. Richard whirled, color draining from his face. "Dave, wait. It's not." But Jax smirked from the booth, mic still hot. "Come on, man. It's just a collab. Your boy's got the Midas touch." Richard stepped forward, hands raised placating. "I was gonna tell you. The label loves it, wanted Jax's name for pull. We'll credit you. I swear, credit." The word tasted like ash. David laughed, bitter and broken. 2 hours of harmony. Huh? Turns out it was just a session fee. He stormed out into the November drizzle, the city a smear of neon and regret. Days blurred into a haze of empty gigs and solitary strums in his cramped Astoria apartment, where posters of Cobain and Mercury mocked him from the walls. Richard's texts piled up, apologies laced with excuses, pleas wrapped in promises of fixes. "We can rework it. Come back." But David deleted them unread, the wound too fresh, betrayal festering like an untuned string. He threw himself into open mics, channeling the pain into fiercer sets, crowds swelling as word spread of the heartbreak troubadour. Yet each applause rang hollow, each chord a reminder of what he'd lost. Not just the song, but the man who'd made him believe in duets. Christmas approached, the city decked in garish lights that twinkled like false hopes. David buskied on the subway platforms, his case filling with crumpled bills from commuters who paused, transfixed by the sorrow in his voice. One frigid afternoon, as he rapped Echoes in the bowels of the F train, a familiar figure emerged from the crowd. Richard, bundled in a wool peacoat, eyes shadowed with the weight of sleepless nights. The platform cleared, leaving them in a bubble of echoing reverb. "I fucked up," Richard said simply, voice raw. The track dropped without you. Label pushed it, Jax's ego. My weakness. But it's poison without your soul. David's fingers stilled on the strings. Rain from his hood dripping onto the frets. Why? I trusted you. Richard stepped closer. The scent of him, cedar and regret, stirring ghosts. Because I was scared. Scared you'd outshine me. That loving you meant losing control. But losing you? That's the real discord. Tears pricked David's eyes, the platform blurring. He wanted to hate him, to walk away into the tunnel's maw. But the music in his blood, the harmony they'd forged, pulled like gravity. They talked for hours, perched on a bench amid the rumble of trains, words unspooling like demo reels. Richard confessed the pressure, the label's demands for marketable queer anthems, his own imposter syndrome from a childhood of hiding. David admitted his fears, of being the muse, not the master, of love as another stage to fall from. As the last train shrieked past, Richard reached for David's hand, tentative. Let me make it right. Not with credits, with us. David pulled away, but not far. Prove it. And so Richard did, in the quiet rebellion of the new year. He pulled the track, tanking his deal with the label in a blaze of emails and slammed doors. Fuck their algorithms, he told David over diner coffee. Ice fierce. We make our own sound. They holed up in the studio, reclaiming echoes, stripping the gloss, infusing it with their raw edges. David's gravelly truth, Richard's layered depth. Late nights bled into dawns, arguments flaring over mixes only to dissolve in kisses that tasted of redemption. The climax came unbidden, in the sweltering heat of a July rooftop party in Bushwick, fireflies of bottle rockets popping against the skyline. Their EP, 2 hours, had dropped independently, raw cuts of jams and confessions, streaming on Bandcamp to a grassroots roar. Labels circled now, but on their terms. David was mid-set, guitar slung low, when Richard joined him on stage unscripted, harmonica in hand. The crowd, friends, misfits, the queer chorus of the city, cheered as they launched into a new track, Betrayal Blues, lyrics co-written in the ashes of hurt. You took my melody and made it shine slash but without the break. It's just a line. Their voices wove, bodies inches apart, sweat slick and electric. Mid-chorus, Richard faltered, dropping to one knee, not proposal, but surrender, pulling David into a kiss under the stars, the band vamping behind them. The rooftop erupted, not in shock, but in catharsis, a roar for the broken boys who'd mended through music. Tears streamed down David's face as they broke apart, the harmony no longer fragile, but forged in fire. In the end, it wasn't a fairy tale, no Grammys, no sold-out arenas overnight. They moved to a shared loft in the LES, walls vibrating with half-finished songs and the hum of domesticity. Richard burning toast, David doodling lyrics on fridge magnets. Tours came, small coffeehouse circuits from Portland to Austin, where audiences sang back words born of betrayal and bomb. David proposed one dawn on that same rooftop, not with rings, but with a custom capo etched harmony eternal. Richard said yes with a laugh and a tackle, their bodies tumbling in a heap of limbs and love. 2 hours had sparked it, but a lifetime unfolded in the notes between, the discovery that love, like music, thrived not in perfection, but in the courageous mess of playing on. In America's vast, unforgiving symphony, they'd found their counterpoint. 2 men, 1 story, endless encores. The afterglow of that rooftop kiss lingered like reverb in a high-ceilinged hall, but David knew better than to trust the echo without testing the source. Back in the loft, with the city's nocturnal symphony filtering through cracked windows, honking taxis, distant sirens, the low thrum of the Williamsburg Bridge, they lay tangled in sheets that smelled of salt and sex, Richard's breath steady against David's neck. "We're really doing this," David murmured, tracing the infinity tattoo with a fingertip, its loops a reminder of loops unbroken. Richard stirred, hazel eyes cracking open, lazy smile curving his lips. "Doing what?" "World domination via folk rock." David chuckled, but it was edged with the old wariness. "No." After everything, Richard propped on an elbow, the morning light gilding his stubble like stage fog. "After everything's exactly why." "I won't bullshit you, Dave, I'm still scared shitless." Labels sniffing around again. "That scout from Atlantic who cornered me at the party last night, but I'm done running solos." He kissed David's temple, soft as a quarter-note rest. "We duet or we don't play." It was the vow David needed, simple as a IIVV progression. And for the first time in months, sleep came easy, dreams laced not with betrayal but with choruses yet unsung. Spring unfurled in New York like a B-side track, tentative blooms in community gardens, the Hudson thawing into sluggish optimism. 2 hours climbed indie charts, not stratospherically, but steadily, playlists curating it alongside Phoebe Bridgers and Julian Baker for its queer heart gut punch. Fans appeared in the wild, a barista in Park Slope slipping David a sharp-scrawled note with her own lyrics, a couple at a Brooklyn flea market clutching the vinyl pressing Richard had bootstrapped, sleeves inked with rooftop Polaroids. "It's like you wrote our story," the woman said, her partner nodding, hands intertwined. David signed the jacket, throat tight, music as mirror, reflecting the hidden harmonies of lives like theirs. But success, that slippery bastard, brought its own dissonances. Richard's inbox overflowed with offers, sync deals for indie films, festival slots in Austin and Bonnaroo. David tagged along when he could, but his day job at the vinyl shop in the village chained him to register shifts, dusting crates of Coltrane and Prince while daydreaming of green rooms. "You quit," Richard urged one evening, sprawled on the couch amid takeout containers, his laptop glowing with tour routing software. "We've got buffer from streams. Let's go all in." David hesitated, fingers plucking idly at a ukulele. "And if it tanks?" Back to ramen and rejection slips. Richard's face fell, the producer's optimism cracking. "You think I'd let that happen? We're a team." The word team echoed hollow that night, as David lay awake listening to Richard's snores, the loft's exposed pipes groaning like a bass line underscoring doubt. Was this partnership, or just another layer Richard was producing? David's rough edges sanded smooth for mass appeal? The thought gnawed, a minor key intrusion, until it crescendoed into quiet sabotage. David booked a solo gig at a queer open mic in the West Village, not telling Richard, craving the purity of standing alone under lights that didn't demand duets. The night was electric. The basement club packed with bodies painted in pride flag hues, air thick with patchouli and possibility. David took the stage, stool creaking under him, and launched into a stripped-down cover of Wicked Game, Chris Isaac's lament twisted with his own gravelly ache. The room leaned in, breaths held, as he segued into an original, solo static, lyrics spilling unfiltered. "I built these walls with borrowed strings / afraid your harmony would clip my wings." Vulnerability hung heavy, applause crashing like waves on Coney boardwalks when he finished. From the shadows, A talent scout, tattooed arms, clipboard in hand, approached. Raw as hell. Man. Ever thought of going bigger? Solo? The offer buzzed in David's veins like amp feedback as he slipped out a side door for air, the alley reeking of garbage and rain-soaked asphalt. And there was Richard, waiting under a buzzing street lamp, jacket zipped against the chill, expression a storm cloud. Saw the flyer on Insta. Didn't think you'd hide it. David's defensiveness flared. Needed space. To breathe without cues. Richard's laugh was bitter, wind-whipped. Space? Or an exit ramp? That scout in their solo act, right? Back to being the lone wolf. 'Cause duets are too messy. The accusation stung. Truth wrapped in projection. David stepped forward, voice low. You produced my pain into profit once. Forgive me for wanting a take I control. They argued in the alley, words volleying like a tennis match gone feral. Richard accusing David of self-sabotage. David hurling back fears of being overshadowed. A passing cab splashed gutter water at their feet, soaking jeans, but neither moved, locked in the standoff. Finally, Richard deflated, shoulders slumping. I get it. I stole your voice once. But this, he gestured between them. This isn't a track to remix. It's us, flaws and all. David's anger ebbed, leaving exhaustion. He nodded, pulling Richard into a hug that smelled of wet wool and unresolved chords. Then no more solos. But promise me equal billing. They sealed it with a kiss, fierce and forgiving, the alley transforming into their private encore. Back home, over lukewarm pizza and a bottle of cheap Merlot, they mapped a compromise. David quit the shop, but they'd carve space for individual pursuits. Richard guest producing for up-and-comers, David workshopping poetry slams infused with lyrics. The loft became a lab of balance, walls papered with set lists and sonnets, nights alternating between joint jams and solitary scribbles. Summer hit like a power chord, humid and unrelenting, the city a pressure cooker of festivals and fire hydrant sprays. Their first joint tour kicked off at South by Southwest in Austin. 3 nights of dive venues and day parties, the Texas air thick with barbecue smoke and bourbon breath. David and Richard shared a van with a ragtag band of openers. Drummer girl with a buzz cut and wicked hi-hat fills, a queer cellist who bowed heartbreak into beauty. The road was a revelation. Endless highways unspooling under big skies, rest stops for greasy fries and furtive handholds, motel rooms where check-ins raised no eyebrows in the age of rainbow flags. But the road, that nomadic beast, tested harmonies like nothing else. In Oklahoma City, after a set where soundcheck glitches turned their opener into a muddled mess, Richard snapped at David over a misplaced pedal. You had one job. Plug it in. David fired back. And you had to micromanage every cue like I'm your intern? The green room emptied fast, leaving them in a standoff amid peeling band stickers. Outside, under a sky bruised purple by dusk, Richard broke first, slumping against the venue's graffiti-tagged wall. I'm turning into the guy I hated, the control freak who kills the vibe. David softened, sliding down beside him, knees knocking. We're both learning. Music's chaos. Love's the improv. They reconciled in the van that night, parked under a canopy of live oaks, the cellist's playlist of Nina Simone crooning low. Hands explored in the dark, rediscovering contours, whispers weaving promises amid the creak of suspension. By morning, bruises from the fight faded into laughter over burnt diner eggs, the tour forging them tighter, scar tissue strong. Fall brought homecoming, leaves carpeting the East River paths in crimson and gold. 2 hours hit a milestone, 100,000 streams, celebrated with a pop-up show at the Rusty Nail, the bar where it all ignited. The crowd swelled past capacity, spilling onto the sidewalk, a tapestry of faces from their journey. The Park Slope barista front row, screaming lyrics, Jax Harlan in the back, uninvited but contrite, nursing a beer with a nod of respect. David and Richard closed with Echoes Reclaimed, a remix that layered betrayal's sting with forgiveness's balm, their voices intertwining in a climax that hushed the room to pin-drop silence before erupting in cheers. Offstage, breathless and beaming, Richard pulled David aside into the storage room, crates of liquor and dusty amps a makeshift confessional. "Marry me," he said. Not a question but a melody. Ring box materializing from his pocket. Simple silver bands engraved with intertwined notes. David's yes was a sob laugh, sealing it with a kiss that tasted of sweat and forever. The wedding was small, rooftop at dusk, officiated by the cellist with vows scripted like lyrics, promises of counterpoints in conflict, rests in repose. Guests, bandmates, barflies, the family who'd come around, raised toasts with craft IPAs, the city their chorus. Yet humanism whispered that harmony wasn't endpoint, but horizon. A year on, with a baby EP brewing, tracks of fatherhood fears and fidelity's quiet joys, they faced new discords. Richard's wanderlust clashing with David's rootedness, the specter of creative blocks looming like winter fog. But they played through, therapy sessions as tuning, date nights as encores. In America's grand, imperfect orchestra, where queer love still navigated minefields of judgment and joy, they turned 2 hours into a lifetime symphony. Dramatic, emotional, a romance etched in the human notes between. Winter clamped down on the city like a distortion pedal cranked too high, muffling Manhattan's roar under layers of slush and salt. David and Richard's loft, once a hive of half-tuned guitars and lyric-scratched journals, now doubled as a nursery wing, crib wedged between the mixing board and a stack of onesies screen-printed with tiny treble clefs. Their son, Elias, named for the prophet of lost voices, had arrived in a blur of midnight contractions and hospital fluorescence, his first cry a high C that pierced the chaos. At 6 months, Eli was a chubby-fisted maestro, gums gnawing on Richard's guitar picks while David hummed lullabies cribbed from Woody Guthrie, voice soft as snow falling on fire escapes. Parenthood reframed their rhythm, turning late-night sessions into dawn patrols of bottle warmings and diaper dashes. Richard, ever the producer, curated playlists for tummy time, Coltrane's saxophone soothing colic fits, Billie Holiday's husk weaving spells for midnight feeds. David, the storyteller, narrated Eli's days in verse, little man with eyes like highways/chasin' dreams we ain't yet named. But beneath the domestic duet lurked undercurrents, sleep deprivation sharpening tempers, ambitions simmering on back burners as bottles took precedence over demos. The first real storm brewed over a gig in Philly, a dual bill with an up-and-coming queer folk act. Richard pushed for it, eyes alight with the old fire. "We need this, remind the world we're more than dads now." David, rocking Eli on his hip amid the loft's clutter, balked. Babysitter costs eat the payout. And who covers if he spikes a fever mid-set? The argument escalated. Words weaponized. Richard calling David stagnant. David accusing Richard of chasing ghosts over family. Doors slammed. Eli's wails the tragic underscore, leaving David to pace the hallway, guilt coiling like smoke from a snuffed amp. Morning brought olive branches, Richard with takeout bagels and a handwritten set list. David with a pot of chamomile that steamed like unspoken sorries. "We're offbeat," Richard admitted, cradling Eli as the baby gummed a teething ring. "But that's jazz, right? Improv in the mess." They rescheduled the gig, hiring a doula friend for backup, and hit the stage renewed, Eli's photo taped to David's guitar case, a talisman against the pull of what-ifs. The Philly crowd, a mix of college kids and grizzled activists, devoured their set, encoring with 2 hours as if it were scripture. Backstage, high on adrenaline, Richard whispered, "You're my anchor riff," and David's kiss answered, fierce as a bridge drop. But life, that unrelenting composer, composed complications. Richard's father, Harlan Hale, a stoic ex-oil rig worker from Bakersfield with a Bible-thick distrust of city follies, announced a visit, the kind that smelled of judgment wrapped in fruitcake. He'd tolerated Richard's phase in L.A., chalking it up to Hollywood haze. But marriage? A child? The old man's letters had grown curt, laced with Leviticus quotes and pleas for straightening out. David braced, polishing the loft till it gleamed, hiding the rainbow flag mug behind neutral dishware. "He'll love Eli," Richard insisted, voice tight. "Has to." Harlan arrived via Amtrak, a hulking figure in flannel and work boots, duffel slung like a shield. The handshake with David was perfunctory, eyes appraising, "Heard you're the music one too," before zeroing on Eli, who cooed from his bouncer. For 2 days, tension hummed like a low E string. Meals where Harlan pontificated on real men and oil booms, Richard deflecting with small talk, David biting his tongue till it bled. Eli, blissfully oblivious, became the bridge, his gummy grins melting Harlan's scowl during a walk in Prospect Park, where geese honked like off-key horns. The climax cracked on night 3. Over meatloaf David had slaved over comfort food as diplomacy. Harlan, fortified by a second scotch, fixed Richard with a stare. This life, parading with him, raising a boy in sin, it's not God's plan. Son. The room iced over, Eli's babble the only warmth. Richard's face flushed, fork clattering. "Love's not sin, Dad. It's salvation." David rose, voice steady as a capo clamp. "We're not parading. We're living." Eli's got 2 dads who'd burn the world for him, queer or not. Harlan's retort died unspoken as Eli toddled forward on chubby legs, offering a slobbery block. The old man took it, eyes misting, and in that pause, the dam broke, not with fury, but fracture. Harlan left the next morning, hug awkward but real, a mumbled "take care of my grandson," the closest to grace. Richard wept in the shower after, David holding him under the spray, water mingling with salt. "He'll come around," David soothed, though doubt lingered. "Or he won't. But we're his plan now." The visit scarred but strengthened, Harlan's emails softening over months. Photos of Eli answered with questions about gigs, a tentative pride flag pin arriving for Father's Day. As Eli's first birthday dawned, their world expanded, a label deal, indie but solid, for a full length, echoes amplified, tracks tracing fatherhood's fugue. Recording sessions juggled nap schedules, Richard engineering from a playpen throne, David crooning to a mic stand rigged with a mobile. The album birthed in a Brooklyn studio redolent of coffee and baby powder, featuring collabs with queer icons, a duet with the cellist on a track about chosen kin, a spoken-word interlude from a trans poet on resilience's rhythm. Launch night at Bowery Ballroom was magic incarnate, chandelier lights swaying like pendulums, crowd a sea of raised fists and tear-streaked cheers. Eli, in a tiny band tee, toddled onstage mid-set, conducting with a maraca, drawing whoops that drowned the monitors. Richard and David closed with a stripped 2 hours, voices raw from tour where Eli between them on a stool, clapping offbeat. Backstage, labels pitched expansions, but they demurred, family first, slipping away to a diner for pancakes at 2 a.m., syrup-sticky fingers linking over the booth. Yet romance, that eternal verse chorus, demanded tending. Date nights carved from chaos. Rooftop picnics with wine and Warren Zevon. Hands rediscovering hips sans diapers in tow. Sex reignited slow. Exploratory. Richard's mouth mapping David's scars from a childhood of hiding. David's nails raking Richard's back in claims of now. Still my harmony? Richard gasped one night. Bodies synced in the loft's hush. Eli's monitor breathing steady chorus. Spring tours beckoned again. This time with Eli in a car seat empire. Nanny on payroll. The van became home on wheels. Snacks smuggled from Waffle House. Sing-alongs to Raffi morphing into rehearsals. In Nashville, a venue glitch stranded them overnight. They buskied on Broadway. David's guitar drawing tipsy tourists. Richard beatboxing bass. Eli gurgling harmonies. A viral clip exploded their feed, millions of views. Comments a tide of "this is love." But fame's undertow pulled. Paparazzi flashes at rest stops. Trolls spewing bile in DMs. Freak show family. David shielded Eli from the noise, but it eroded edges. One midnight in a Memphis motel, scrolling hate while Richard slept. David shattered, sobbing into a pillow, the weight of visibility crushing. Richard woke, arms enveloping. We're not their story. We're ours. They called a press moratorium, channeling fury into a track. Haters him, a punk folk rant that topped alt charts, turning venom to victory. By summer's solstice, with Eli walking, stumbling toward mics like a prodigy, they headlined a pride fest in D.C., rainbow confetti raining as 10,000 sang back. Harlan flew in, flag pin gleaming, dancing awkwardly with Eli on shoulders. The sight, grandpa and grandson, worlds bridged, drew David's tears mid-chorus. Post-set, Richard knelt again, not for vows but renewal. To more messes, more music. David's yes was a vow eternal. In the humanism of it all, America's patchwork of progress and prejudice, they wove a tapestry. Love as labor, discovery as daily grace. 2 hours had ignited. A family's lifetime sustained the flame. Autumn's palette bled across the Appalachians as the tour van crested the Blue Ridge Parkway. Leaves a riot of russet and amber under a sky stretched taut as a snare drum. Eli, now too and tyrannical with toddler opinions, ruled from his captain's chair, decreeing no Dylan, dada, wheels on the bus, with the fist of a tiny dictator. David complied, ukulele strumming the ditty while Richard drummed on the dash, their laughter a counterpoint to the engine's hum. 2 years married, for since that rusty nail night, and the road felt less conquest, more pilgrimage, pilgrims chasing the next chord in a life scored with spills and spontaneous harmonies. The album Echoes Amplified had shattered expectations, not with blockbuster sales but cultural quake. Op-eds in The Advocate hailing it as queer fatherhood state of the union. Playlists from NPR to TikTok spinning haters him into anthems for the marginalized. Royalties trickled into college funds and studio upgrades, but the real wealth was in the letters, fans mailing drawings of stick-figure families under rainbows, confessions of coming-outs catalyzed by their lyrics. You made it okay to be me, one read, from a teen in Flyover Nowhere. David pinned them to the van's visor, talismans against the miles. Yet prosperity's shadow loomed. Burnout, that silent thief. Richard's eyes carried hollows from sleepless mixes. David's voice rasped from endless encores. Eli's energy was boundless, tantrums in green rooms, midnight wake-ups demanding stories about the Music Man, but it drained reservoirs. In Asheville, after a sold-out barn gig where fog machines choked the air like bad karma, they collapsed into a B&B featherbed, Eli snoring in a portable crib. "We need a beat," David whispered, head on Richard's chest, heartbeat a steady 4/4. "Off-ramp. Recharge." Richard nodded, fingers threading curls. "Bermuda? No home. Loft lockdown. Write what we live, not chase what sells." The hiatus was gospel, 2 months off-grid. The city traded for upstate cabin rentals. Adirondack logs by a lake where loons keened like untuned fiddles. They arrived in a flurry of suitcases and sippy cups, the air crisp with pine and promise. Days unspooled lazy. Mornings fishing for bass with Eli's toy rod. Afternoons sprawled on quilts. Notebooks open to half-formed hooks. Richard taught Eli basic chords on a pint-sized guitar, G like growl, while David penned ballads by firelight, lyrics of lake ripples mirroring doubt. Waves lap at the shore we built / carry-in secrets we ain't spilt. Intimacy rekindled in the quiet. Skinny dips at dusk. Water cool as a minor 7th. Bodies buoyant and bold. Richard's hands, calloused from frets, traced David's spine like reading braille. Murmurs of mist this punctuating gasps. David reciprocated, lips charting Richard's collarbone, the salt of sweat mingling with lake mist. "You're my forever bridge," he breathed, climaxes crashing soft as waves. Eli, oblivious, built sandcastles of songs, humming nonsense tunes that wove into their jams. But retreat birthed revelation's thorns. One fog-shrouded evening, as rain tattooed the tin roof, Richard unearthed an old demo reel, pre-David tracks, slick and solitary. "Listen," he said, laptop balanced on knees, Eli dozing against his side. The sounds poured, electronica veined with isolation, beats thumping like hearts in lockdown. David heard the genius, but also the gulf Richard's polish against his grit. "This you without me," David said, not accusation but awe. Richard paused the play, eyes searching. "Yeah. And it's hollow. You filled the spaces I didn't know were empty." The confession cracked wider that night, over stew simmered with root veggies from a farm stand. Richard admitted the fear that lingered, Eli's future in a world still hostile, his own mortality as provider. "What if I can't protect him? Us?" David set down his spoon, hand covering Richard's. "We do it together. Not perfect, human." They cried then, tears seasoning the broth, Eli stirring to pat their cheeks with sticky fingers. Dada said, "Sing." And so they did, a improvised round of This Land Is Your Land, voices wobbling into wholeness. Re-entry to the city was jarring, horns blaring like feedback squeals, subways sardined with strangers. The loft welcomed with dust bunnies and backed-up mail, but inspiration surged. New tracks gestated, Cabin Fever, a rollicking ode to rustication, Eli's Lullaby, acoustic whispers for bedtime battles. They shopped a single to their label, who greenlit a concept album, Family Fugue, exploring kinship's kaleidoscope. Collabs beckoned, a verse from a black trans rapper on allyship's Awkward Grace, harmonies with a Latina folk duo on Blended Legacies. Eli's preschool debut tested paternal poise, a co-op in Brooklyn Heights, rainbow cubbies and snack charts. Drop-off day. David clung like Velcro, Richard prying fingers gentle. He's ready, babe. We raised a rock star. Eli toddled in fearless, waving by with a grin that gutted them. Pickup brought tales, finger paints of music trees, a crush on classmate Mia that prompted giggles over gelato. Our boys got game, Richard quipped, but his eyes shone with the ache of letting go. Winter holidays hummed with ritual. Harlan's annual visit. Now tradition. Turkey carved with less gruff. Stories swapped of Bakersfield Thanksgivings. He'd mellowed. Eli's hugs thawing permafrost. Even broaching that pride thing with a gruff. Looks colorful. David and Richard exchanged gifts wrapped in newsprint. Custom pics engraved with inside jokes. A leather-bound journal for shared verses. New Year's found them on the rooftop. Eli bundled in a snowsuit. Fireworks blooming over the skyline like punctuation to their decade. Spring bloomed adversarial. A custody scare when a troll lawsuit alleged unfit parenting from doctored pap shots Eli neglected at a playground gig. The claim crumbled under evidence. Nannies' affidavits, fans' testimonials, but the violation lingered, fueling armor anthems, a protest single that rallied queer parents nationwide. Protests followed. From D.C. marches to L.A. rallies, David and Richard headlining with Eli on shoulders, megaphone anthems echoing, "Our love's no crime" / "It's the family line." Climax crested at Glastonbury's American Kin, Fire Island Pines Fest. Dunes kissed by Atlantic spray, crowd a utopia of bodies free. Their set peaked with fugue finale, Eli backing on tambourine, the beach alight with lighters and lovers. Midsong, a storm rolled in, thunder clapping like applause, rain sheeting biblical. They played through, soaked and defiant, lightning framing silhouettes. Offstage, in a tent redolent of salt and sunscreen, Richard pulled David close. Storms our soundtrack now. Their kiss was deluge deep, Eli cheering from a towel pile. Post-fest fallout. Pneumonia for Eli, a week of hospital vigils, 4 drips and story hours, Richard pacing corridors, David crooning by bedside. Recovery was slow grace, homebound with puzzles and playlists, gratitude sharpening edges. The scare birthed healing harmonics, an acoustic EP of respite anthems, proceeds to queer youth health funds. By summer's zenith, with Eli 3 and terrorizing tots with concerts in the park, they eyed expansion, a West Coast move? Nah. Roots ran East River deep. Instead, podcast launched, Harmony Hours, chats with queer creators on love's logistics. Guests poured stories, adoptions navigated, transitions toasted mirroring their mosaic. Romance endured in margins. Anniversary escapes to the cabin. No kiddo, just them hikes to hidden coves. Nights under stars scripting sonnets on skin. 10 years, Richard marveled one eve. Fireflies winking witnesses. From 2 hours to this, David's reply was touch. Bodies a timeless score. In the narrative arc of their America, land of liberty's hard won, they embodied the human, flawed virtuosos, love's laborious leitmotif. Discovery wasn't destination, but the dawn chorus after every night's dissonance. The calendar flipped to their 5th anniversary like a page in a well-thumbed score, and David Canehale found himself at dawn on the Williamsburg Bridge, guitar case at his feet, the East River below, a ribbon of molten gold under the rising sun. Eli, for now and all kinetic energy, balanced precariously on the railing, supervised by Richard's hawk-eyed grip, pointing at ferries churning wakes. Boat song. Papa, make one. David grinned, slinging the tailor over shoulder, fingers plucking a jaunty riff that mimicked hull slaps and horn blasts. Richard joined harmony, baritone grounding the whimsy, their voices carrying over the hum of early commuters, a private concert for pigeons and passers-by. Family Fugue had cemented their legend, not as chart dominators but cultural lodestars, Grammy nods for Best Folk Album, TED Talks on queer kinship in Key, school curriculums weaving their lyrics into lit classes. The loft overflowed with accolades. Plaques propped against Eli's art easel, fan mail sorted into Inspire piles. Yet acclaim's weight-bent branches, offers flooded, Broadway musicals from their catalog, docuseries pitches on the duo that harmonized America. Richard thrived in the bustle, networking like a pro, but David felt the pull of pause, craving verses unvetted by virality. Conflict stirred subtle, a seventh chord unresolved. At a fundraiser gala in Tribeca, crystal flutes clinking amid A-listers, David watched Richard schmooze a Netflix exec, charm dialed to 11. Our story on screen, Richard enthused later, eyes sparkling over tiramisu. Think Rocketman but folk queer dad vibes. David's fork paused, unease twanging. Our story? Or Hollywood's remix? The question festered, blooming into boardroom battles. Richard pushing the deal for legacy, David vetoing scripts that sanitized betrayals into rom-com quips. They'll straight wash the ache, he argued in their kitchen, Eli finger-painting at the table. Richard sighed, kneading his temples. It's exposure, Dave. For Eli's world. The schism peaked at Eli's preschool play, a chaotic nutcracker where he stole scenes as a dancing drum. Post-performance, amid juice boxes and proud parent hugs, the exec cornered them. Biopic greenlit, thinking Timothée Chalamet as young Richard. David's laugh was sharp. And me? The brooding sidekick. The drive home crackled. Eli's chatter the buffer. At a red light on Flatbush, Richard exploded. You're sabotaging again. This could change everything. David's retort lashed. Or commodify it. We're not products. Eli whimpered from the back. No yell. And silence fell heavy as a power outage. Reconciliation brewed in crisis. Eli's fever spiked that night, a strep scare sending them to the ER, sterile halls echoing with worry's white noise. In the waiting room, vending machine coffee bitter on tongues, Richard broke. I'm chasing shadows, fame over us. Forgive my greed. David squeezed his hand, monitors beeping benediction. We chase together. Or not at all. Dawn brought Eli's recovery, antibiotics and applesauce, and a bonfire of the script, pages curling in the loft's hearth like exorcised demons. Renewed, they pivoted. Self-produced doc, unscripted symphony, raw footage of van life and vow renewals, crowdfunded by fans who pledged with personal quotas. Editing sessions became family affairs, Eli directing with a toy megaphone, cuts laced with bloopers of burp symphonies. Premiere at a queer film fest in Provincetown drew tears and toasts, waves crashing counterpoint outside the theater. Eli's world widened, kindergarten lottery win at a progressive school in Crown Heights, where two mommy cubbies neighbored theirs. Field trips to the Met, David decoding Warhol's queerness. Science fairs with Richard's DIY circuits buzzing like bees. But Eli's questions pierced. Why some kids got one daddy? Bedtime talks flowered into Why We. A children's book with lyrics as text. Illustrations of diverse duos, adoptive, bio, blended, published by a indie press specializing in rainbow reads. Adulthood's arc looped back. Harlan's health faltered. Heart scare in Bakersfield, pulling Richard west for weeks. David held the fort, solo parenting through tantrums and teething, Video calls bridging miles with Eli's Strong. Cheers. Harlan rallied, crediting "that boy of yours" in recovery cards. A full circle grace. Richard returned sun-kissed, bearing olive branch. A Coritan instrumental. Hill's Hope. Gifted to his dad steel guitar twang meeting folk soul. Played on a porch swing under California oaks. Climax crested unannounced. In the heartland they'd long skirted. A Nebraska folk fest. Cornfields framing stages. Heartland faces open to their gospel. Headlining under a harvest moon. With Eli on percussion perch. They unveiled Midwest Mend. A suite for Harlan. Weaving Rust Belt regrets into redemption refrains. Midset. A heckler's slur cut through. Fairy tales don't fly here. But the crowd turned. Booze drowning bile. Eli's innocent tambourine trilling triumph. Richard locked eyes with David. Mid-chorus. And ad-libbed. This fairy tales are truth. Love lands anywhere. The field ignited. Encores echoing till curfew. Backstage. Amid wildflowers and well-wishes. A fan approached. Farm boy Ernest. Eyes wide. Your music. It let me tell my folks. They're trying to. David hugged him. Richard clapping shoulder. Eli offering a high five. In that barn-lit moment, impact crystallized, not metrics, but mended lives. Denuma dawned gentle. Sabbatical in the cabin. Eli 5 and schooling fish. The lake a mirror for maturity. They wrote unhurried. A memoir in songs. Decade duet. Reflections on betrayal's bassline. Fatherhood's flourish. Release coincided with Pride 2035. Parades from NYC to NOLA. Their float a van on wheels. Eli waving from a future headliner throne. Anniversary 10 marked pinnacle. Vow renewal on that rusty nail rooftop. Now there's by lease stars wheeling. Bandmates toasting with craft brews. Harlan officiated. Voice gravelly with pride. Eli ringbearer. Scattering petals like confetti chords. Vows updated. Through discords and discoveries. I chord with you. Rings exchanged. Bands etched with Eli's birthdate. Sealed with a kiss that tasted of tears and tenacity. Years blurred forward. Eli's first guitar recital at 8. Fumbling Wonderwall to parental whoops. Teen rebellions navigated with therapy and trust. His coming out at 16 met with "We knew. Kid, now jam your truth." David and Richard aged gracefully. Silver threading temples. Lines etching laugh maps. Mentoring at queer youth centers. Albums evolving into podcasts on legacy. In twilight tours. Van weathered but wheels true. They played for elders now. Nursing homes where 2 hours sparked memories. Hands clasped across generations. Retirement whispered. But stages called encore. A final album. Eternal echo. Capping the canon. The journey's coda. No tragic fade. But humanistic hum. Love as lifelong improv. America's anthem rewritten in their key. From 2 hours spark to eternity's symphony. David and Richard proved. Harmony heals. Discovery endures. And in the space between notes, we find home.